Okay. Okay. So good morning, everybody. We will start. Let's start from the mystery brisa. So I just want to give a little bit of a hakdama. We have two psukim that have contradictory mashmoyisim, and the brisa is sorting out what the meaning of these two psukim are. So one pasuk says, "Shivas yamim sa'or lo yimotzi b'vatech." So when it says lo yimotzi, it seems to indicate that it cannot be found in your house, whether you can see it or not, whether it's yours or not. The b'vatechem, it only says that you're not allowed to have chametz in your home, but in your warehouse, in your shul locker, maybe you are allowed to have chametz. The other pasuk says, "Not to say yachal shivas yamim v'lo yeirah l'chol chametz." So first of all, it's only usher if you could see it. Unlike the previous pasuk, which is mashma, that even if you can't see it, as long as it's there, it's a problem. It also says lacha, which means only if the chametz belongs to you is it a problem. But if the chametz belongs to somebody else, like to a guy, it would not be a problem. So we have two psukim who each give off contradictory halachas, and the brisa is here to sort that out. And the brisa, in and of itself, is very, very contradictory within itself as well. Tanarvam, Shivas Yamim Sa'or Lo Yimotzi B'Vatech. Matamid Loimer. Why does it say that pasuk for? Alik Far Nemer Lo Yeira L'Cha Sa'or V'Lo Yeira L'Cha Chametz B'Chol Gvulcha. It's B'Chol Gvulcha. I'm sorry. Repeat Nemar Lo Yeira L'Cha Sa'or. The pasuk says Lo Yeira L'Cha Sa'or, which would indicate Shalachat Raya. Shalachiyat Raya. You're not allowed to have and see your own chametz in your home. But if the chametz belonged to a guy, for instance, or if the chametz belonged to hektish, then it's not a problem. Yochel, I might think that yatman, I can hide the chametz, cover it over, and if it's covered over and you won't see it, you won't be over lo yira. Or v'yikabel pikdonis ben anochi, you should be allowed to accept pikdonis from a guy. Talmud Lomer lo yimotzei. It says lo yimotzei, which means you shouldn't have chametz in your house at all. Chametz should not be found in your house at all, whether or not you see it, whether or not it belongs to you. David, good morning. We went back a little bit. That's why I started early, because I have to get this brisa onto the recording. This isser, to have any type of chametz, even if it belongs to someone else, you might think it only applies to a guy that you don't have control over. But a guy who you have control over, minayin, how do you know that even his chametz is usher? Now, right away, this doesn't make any sense, because if a guy who you don't have control over, his chametz is usher, surely if you have control over him, his chametz should be usher. And this is one of the questions that the Gemara is going to have to answer, because this brisa doesn't seem to make sense. Now the brisa has another interesting point. I would only know that the chametz is usher to have in your home, in your pits, in your ditches, in your caves. Minayin, how do you know you're not allowed to have chametz there? Talmud Lomer, in the next pasuk, b'chol gevulacha, in any of your properties. V'adayin ani omer, I would still not know everything. I might argue the bottom over mishum bal yoro bal yimotze. If it's in your house, then you're over bal yoro bal yimotze. Ubal yatin ubal yikabel k'daynach v'nachri. You're over on chametz whether it's yours or not, whether you could see it or not. You're over, but that's only in your house, because the lo yimotze is the pasuk that says b'vatechem. And the gvulim, and in gvulim, other places that you have, which are covered by lo yireh lecha sa'ar b'chol gvulecha, I would say shalchayat teraya, only your own chametz is usher there. Aval ataraya shalacherim b'shal gavoya, but you're allowed to have chametz of others. Zok the brisa minayin litan es ha'omer shal zeh b'zeh. How do you know to extend the chumrah of lo yimotze that you're not even allowed to have somebody else's chametz tikavulecha b'shal zeh b'zeh? And how do you know to extend the kula that you're allowed to have chametz of another person to your home? So we're basically saying, how do we know to have contradictory halachas apply. That you could have somebody else's chametz, yet you can't have somebody else's chametz, which makes no sense at all. Talmud Leimer, Sa'ar, L'Gzeir Shamar. In each of these two psukim, it has the word Sa'ar. Never Sa'ar bebatim. When the Torah says La Yimatze bevatechem, it uses the word Sa'ar there. Sa'ar La Yimatze bevatechem. But never Sa'ar begvulin. When it talks about Gevulecha, it says Lo Yoirelecha Sa'ar. So Ma Sa'ar Hamar bebatim, Oiber Mishul Bal Yira, Bal Yimatze. Just like the Sa'ar that it says by the Batim, Yoiber Bal Yira, Bal Yimatze, and Bal Yatmin, and Bal Yakabel Pedoyim and Anachri. Meaning it applies not only to your own chametz, but even to the chametz that belongs to a goy. Af sa'ar hamar begvulin, so too the sa'ar that it's talking about, which is usher in any place that you have. Wherever you are, it's usher to have anybody's chametz. That's one limit. And then the other limit is exactly the opposite and contradictory. The same way that by sa'ar, it only applies to your own. So too, the Layimotze is Shulachaya Teroya, Avalateroya Shulacher Mishal. So this is completely contradictory because we want to apply the issue of a stranger's chametz to both places, Gubulecha and Batecha, and then we want to say the heter of somebody else's chametz applies to Gubulecha and Batecha. So it makes no sense at all. The Gemara is going to sort that out. Amar, let's first go see what the Brisa says. But we wouldn't know that the chametz is aser only a nachi that you don't have control over. But how do you know that the chametz is also aser by a guy who you do have control over? That's aser as well. This makes no sense because the svara is required that it's more reasonable to answer the comments of a guy if you do have control over the guy, not if you don't have control over the guy. So this whole logic makes no sense. So Amar by Eipach and Yachanami change the Brisa and say the Brisa says we know that if the guy is under your control, his comments is usher. How do you know if the guy is not under your control that his comments is also usher? For that it says La Yimatze. That's how Abaye learns the Brisa, meaning he really has to change the wording of the Brisa, which is something that we'd rather not say. Let's not change the wording of the Brisa. But let's say that when the Brisa wants to extend this halacha even to a guy that you have control over, we weren't trying to extend an iser, we were trying to extend a heter. And what is the heter that we're trying to extend? The Aresha code. The Brisa is referring to the first halacha of the Brisa, which says, Shalchaya Teraya, Avalataraya, Shalacherim, Vishal Gavaya. What is also to have in your home on Pesach? Your own chametz. But chametz of another person, such as a goy or hektish, that there is no isser bal yirah to have. And that the Brisa asks, maybe this heter to house chametz that's not yours, maybe that only applies if the guy whose chametz it is not under your control, so you're less connected to it. But if you control this nachri and he lives with you, meaning you're more connected to the chametz, how do you know that that's still going to be mutter because it's not your chametz? Talmud Leimer lo yimatze. In fact, the Gemara lo yimatze is telling you iser lo yimatze. You may not have that chametz. So how could you learn from lo yimatze that you're allowed to have chametz of a guy? It makes no sense. In fact, the Gemara Tana the hader hatera. The Tana is looking for a makar in the Torah to be matter the chametz of the guy. The nosav lakral yisur, and it brings the pasuk of lo yimatze, which is the Torah saying you're not allowed to have that chametz. Zok the Gemara, also a stretch. Mishum shenemer lacha lacha treizim. It says lo yara lacha shachar b'chol b'vulacha, which is in Shemois. But in Re'eh, when the Torah discusses the halachas of Yom Tov, the Torah once again says the same exact words. Lo yara lacha shachar b'chol b'vulacha. There it's completely redundant, and we have a rule in the Torah of if you don't need lo yara lacha sa'ar for any halacha over there, we can just say that lacha applies to somewhere else, and we'll say that the lacha of the lo yireh lacha in Re'eh gets connected to the lo yimatze lacha, and that's the limit. How do you know that even if you have control over the guy, his chametz is still mutter for you to have in your home on Pesach? Because it says like lecha, even though it doesn't say lecha in the pasuk, but we're importing the lecha from Parshas Re'eh, where the lecha is extra. So either way, if you're like a buyer like Rava, you're going to have to sort of re-engineer the brisa. So either way has its chesronos. Abaya says you flip the words around, and Rava says well, Yimatze is referring to the lecha that's in a different parsha that we're saying in Tanei. Okay, Amar. Now let's go to the main steer. We have a steer in the brisa Minei Bay. Is it usher to house the chametz of a guy in your home on Pesach or not? We have the Yorelacha saying that it's not a problem, and we have the Yimatze saying it is a problem. So what is it? Omar Yochel Yatim Bikabel Pegdashim and Nachem Tamad Leimer Lo Yimatze. Fact Gemara Amad Reisha Shal Koy Dayroya Avalat Rosh Lachem Shal Gevaya. Everything will look Hashem. When is it also for you to have it? When do you apply the Lo Yimatze? Is how the Kabbalah of the Achrayis. If the owner accepted responsibility, the Yid, even though the Yid doesn't own the chametz of the guy, but he accepts responsibility for the chametz of the guy, then it's also for him to have that in his house on Pesach. And how do like Kabbalah of the Achrayis? And the brisa that says you're allowed to house the chametz of the guy, that's if it's in your house, but you weren't makabel any type of a Christ, so it's not connected to you. Just like the Rabbi said to the people of the Mechuzah who were hosting a legion of soldiers, and these soldiers had their own stuff and their own cakes and their own mezainis stashed away in their suitcase. And he said, you better destroy all the chametz that belongs to the soldiers. You got to get rid of them, not have them in your house on Pesach. You know why? Because since if they get stolen or lost, you're going to be responsible and you'll have to pay for it. So that gives you a quasi financial interest in these items. And therefore, we consider them like they are yours. And therefore, also, that's why you need to destroy them. And yeah, you'll have to pay back these soldiers after Pesach. So it seems to be that if you're responsible for chametz, and if you would lose money if something happened to this chametz, that makes it yours enough that you're going to be mechuyev to get rid of it. So let me ask you a question. What would happen if you own shares in a company that has chametz? You don't directly control the chametz, but technically if the chametz gets ruined, you have a loss. So there's actually a shaila if you're mechuyev to sell those shares with your chametz before Pesach. But let me ask you an even more interesting shaila. The Gemara says here that if you lose money because you're going to have to pay if this item gets lost, even though it's not yours, you're still mechuyev to be invited. Well, what if you own an insurance company and you're insuring a client that has a bakery? And in fact, if everything burns down, you're going to have to pay for that chametz. Do you have to divest yourself of that company for Pesach? You have to sell it. So for that, Shlomo Zalman Auerbach Paskins, it's brought down in Dirshem Mishnah that it's not a problem. Because when do you say that's considered yours enough to trigger a lo yimatzeh? That's if you have a chiyuv to watch it, and if something happens to it, you have to pay. If you're an insurer has absolutely no obligation to watch and to protect the items. Their job is, if the items get damaged or destroyed or stolen, they have to reimburse. That's not enough, Shlomo Zalman, to trigger an issue lo yimatzeh. So if you have any stocks in an insurance company, not to worry. Here, this chametz is not yours. You don't own it. It belongs to the goy. But it will cause you a loss of money if it disappears. So you do have an interest in it. So is that considered your money? Where is this shaila asked? It's asking about a chiyuv kefir. The halacha is, if a ganav steals from you and he's caught, he's got to pay you back twice, provided that you're the owner, provided that you own the object that he stole. So the Gemara discusses a case where you had a carbon. You said arei alai oila, and then you designated this sheep to be your carbon oil. And the ganav stole the sheep. He didn't steal your sheep. That sheep belonged to the Beis Hamikdash. It was hektish. But because he stole the sheep, you now have to buy a new sheep. So this sheep to you is a davar agarim lamamen. Because if it goes missing, it's going to cause you to have to lay out more money to buy another sheep. The Gemara has a machlokes there. If a ganav steals that, he never pays capable to hektish. You don't pay capable to hektish, but maybe I'm enough of an owner because of the fact that I'll lose money that you have to pay me capable. There's actually a machlokes in the Gemara if dover agorim l'momen k'mamadami, if it's considered mine, and therefore the ganav would pay me capable. So Dr. Gemara, if you hold dover agorim l'momen k'mamadami, it's logical you have a financial interest in this chametz. You would even get capable for it if it was stolen. So it makes sense that you could have to get rid of it on Pesach because of lo yimatzeh. If you hold dover agorim l'momen is lav k'mamadami, which means I don't have any financial interest in it, and the ganav would not pay me capable, my kalamemar. So how could you justify that I have enough ownership that I'm a chayiv to make beer on this chametz? Zok Gemara shani hacha the amar lo yimatzeh. Lo yimatzeh is telling you, even though normally it's not considered your money, but lo yimatzeh tells you don't find any chametz in your house, even if it doesn't have a choshev mishpatik status of your money. Ikadami, there's another opinion as to how this conversation happened, and it started from 180 degrees away, from the opposite side of the spectrum. It makes sense that if you hold lav k'mamadami, that's why hainu de istrich kra. That's why we needed a pasuk of a lo yimatzeh. Because without lo yimatzeh, you would say that he doesn't have a financial interest in it. If you hold davar k'mamadami, lo yimatzeh lamali. Why do I need lo yimatzeh? It's no different than any other chametz that I own. I don't need a pasuk to list off every type of chametz that I own. I have to destroy. So why should this be any different? Why does it need an honorable mention? Zok Gemara, it's true. I would have thought, even though you hold over a very moment to moment on me, but the fact of the matter is, if this chametz is here after Pesach, I give it back to the guy. I don't get to keep it, so it's not really mine. So therefore, lav reshus ekoi, maybe it's not enough considered the my reshus that the Torah would say that I have to get rid of it before Pesach. That even this type of ownership, which is not a real ownership of the actual item, it's still enough to trigger an issue of lo yimatzeh, and you have to get rid of it before Pesach. Now that we're discussing different levels of ownership and how it impacts what I'm owning, the Gemara quotes a shaila that's somewhat related. The Talmidim asked Rabbi the following shaila. They used to have a system of taxation where if you had a herd of animals, you have to give every 10th animal to the king. It was a tax system. If this same tax system existed today, it would mean if you have a herd of animals, you have to give 6 out of 10 to the government. In those days, it was only 1 out of 10. But in our government, it would be 6 out of 10. So if you have a herd of animals, it's not yet identified which is the animal that's going to the king. So we will say, in essence, that the king has a financial interest in all of your animals because he can get 1 out of 10. We also know that there's halacha, a firstborn animal is a korban, and you have to be makbid on the mizbeach. Now that there's no Beis Hamikdash, we wait till this animal gets a mum, and once it gets a mum, then the owner can keep it and shecht it and use it. So the shaila is, the halacha is, the Torah says, li kol b'chor b'Yisrael. I get every b'chor of the Yisrael, of a loy b'acherim. But if this is not solely owned by a Yisrael, then there is no halacha of b'chor. The Eder Zeh, and this flock of animals, she'isure shel melech b'seichei, the 1/10 that's going to be given to the king is amongst this flock. The more wants to know, chayeves b'b'chayra, losais l'koyin ha'b'chayra shalahem, must you give the koyin these b'chayros? Must you give the koyin these b'chayros because it's considered solely belong to the Yid? Or do you say, since the king has an ownership stake in these animals, they're potter from the halacha b'chayr? So that was a question that was posed to Rava. So Zok to Rava, or the people who asked Rava the Shaila clarified and qualified. If the king's not coming directly after the animal, he just wants to be paid off, and if you pay him the value of the animal, I'll be happy. Loy kami boil on the chay. Then for sure I wouldn't say that there's enough of a financial interest of the goy, of the king, in your animal that it should pot you from the chayr. So rather you be mechuyev in the chayr. Ki kami boil on the shayla that you asked of Rava is hechad loy motzim esalak lebezuzay. When the king Vidavka wants to take the animal, he won't accept cash in lieu of. What's the halacha? Is the ownership portion of the king enough to say that there's no chiyuv b'chayra? Amar lahu, Rabbi Paskin for them, Petura, it's potter from the chayra, and you don't have to give the animal to the chayra. Vatanya, we learned a brisa that said chayeves. In the case of our noina, you are chayev to give a bechar to the chayra. That the murder is a huge difference. Hasam the matzah misalakle. The brisa that's talking about our noina that says that it's chayiv in Meiser, it's chayiv in B'chayra. That's speaking about our anointing where the king would be happy to accept cash in lieu of. There, we say it's chayiv in B'chayra. But in the case where the king Medafka wants the animal itself, then the king's ownership stake in the animals pater them out from B'chayra. Ikadamri, there's another version of how this went down, and in fact, no one ever asked Rava Shaila. Rava on his own stated a psak halacha. Even if you could pay him off, it's still potter. Why is that? Zokt Rashi, the chalkama deloy salke, till you pay him off, yodai shaykh behemoth. He still has some connection to it. So even though you could pay him off, but you haven't paid him off yet, and therefore his interest is strong enough that you'll be potter from the mitzvah of the chayra of these animals. But what about Isis Hanayim? These kings didn't just tax your animals, they taxed your dough. And we know when you make a dough of 5 pounds of flour, you have to take off challah. Reshus arisai seichem. Again, arisai seichem only if you're the sole owner. But if there's a guy who has an ownership stake in your dough, you would be part of challah. So zokt Rava, Isis are noina chayeves b'challah. The Isis are noina chayev b'challah, which is questionable because we just said that if the king has a stake in it, you should be part. And Rava says even stronger. Even if you actually have to give him a part of the dough, you can't pay him off. Why is that? My time, Zok to Gemara, behemoth is lakala. If you have a behemoth, everybody knows that you have that behemoth. And since everybody knows that you have that behemoth, since everyone knows and everybody knows that the king has a chelik in it, and therefore they'll know that the king has a chelik in it, and therefore you don't have to give the chelik. But Isa Lesbakal, people don't know if it's the king's, if it's not the king's, and if they see you not taking off challah, they're going to think that you don't have to take challah at all, and that will be a problem. So that's one shot. Now the Gemara is winning. So when everybody knows that this animal is subject to our anointing, people see animals, then they won't question it if you don't treat it with the kedusha of a b'chayra, because they assume that there's a goyish ownership stake in it. But dough, people don't know. People might think that it's my own dough. People might think maybe I already paid off the king. The dough that people have in their private homes, people don't know about. And therefore, if they see you not taking up challah from your dough, they'll think that you're doing it unlawful. That's one shot. The other shot is an animal that the government sees it, and therefore you can't get out of it. But Isa in your house, it's very hard for them to enforce that. And therefore, since you could get off and not give Arnuna at all if you wanted to, you could try tax evasion, since nobody can tell anyway. That means that the king does not have such a tfisa in it, because you can easily get out of it, and therefore you're mechuyev to take off challah. There's actually a shaila here. You're only taking off challah because of maris ayin, or you're taking off challah because you can get out of it. So the question is, do you make a bracha on such challah, or maybe it's not mechuyev midaraisa? So there's actually a challah rishonim if you make a bracha on a farashas challah under these circumstances. Tanar abad, nachish and nichlas l'chateri shal Yisrael u'b'tzeka b'yad. you have you're in your office on Pesach, and a guy comes in munching on a cookie, or you're standing in your office, and a guy comes in with the Timmy's with Timbits. He comes in, but they're not yours.
It could be a yid coming into the office also with the same thing.
Yeah,
you're just done because chus that it's going to be a guy.
But the difference is the halacha is ein zakak levayer. You can totally ignore it. You don't have to throw him out. If a yid comes in, you have to tell him, Rabbi Yid, what you're doing is a terrible isser, and you need to get rid of the chametz right away. A guy comes in, you don't got to say anything. You don't even have to ask him to leave. There's no problem whatsoever because it's the guy's chametz. If kido yatzloi, what if the guy gave it to the Jew and he made him into a shomer socher to watch it, and now I'm responsible for it, like we just learned in Amud Beis, zakak levayer, that I would have a chiyuv to destroy because I'm responsible for it. Now, what happens if yichad loy bayis? I told him, Goy, you want me to take care of your chametz? Put it right there in that specific corner. Ein zakak levayer, that you don't have to destroy. Now Rashi says, what does it mean yichad loy bayis? Kloimar loy kiblu olav. If I told you put it there, I'm basically saying I'm not taking responsibility for your chametz, but you can put it there in that corner. That'll be your goyish corner. Here you have my house. Hanach be'achas min hazaviyos. Put it there. Then ein zakak levayer because he's not accepting responsibility upon himself. Tosfos doesn't like Rashi's pshat, and Tosfos asks, if you weren't makabel achrayis, then what's the difference if it was yichud mokam or not? If you're not makabel achrayis, you're always allowed to have the goy's chametz. So Tosfos wants to learn a chiddush that even if you were makabel achrayis, but if you gave the guy a specific place to put the chametz, you're still going to be potter from beer, which is a massive chiddush. How do you know that? Where do you see that? So Gemara shenemer lo yimotzei. It says lo yimotzei. Frankly, my Gemara lo yimotzei indicates iser, not a heter that you're allowed to keep the guy's chametz. How do you see heter from lo yimotzei? Amar papa a reisha. It's going on the reisha. V'hachik amar. If kidu etzloi zakak levayer. The first part of the brayso says, not by yichud makam. In a regular place, when you give chametz to a yid, a guy gives a chametz to a yid as a petatim, and he pays him for it, that he's responsible to watch it, there he has to burn it. Why? Zakak levayer shenemer lo yimatzei. But Rav Ashi Omar lo ilam ha-sefer. It's actually going on the sefer. The chiddush is that even if it's yichud, even if you're according to Tosfos, even if you're makabel achrayis, but you designated a specific spot for the goy to store his chametz in your rishus, that would not be mechuyev in beer. And how do you say it from lo yimatzei? V'hachik amar yichud lo bayis ein zakak levayer shenemer lo yimatzei b'vatechem. It shouldn't be found in your home. V'hal lav didehu. But this area that I designated for the exclusive use of the goy, it's not yours. The nachri ki kama'ayel levesa the nafshe kama'ayel. When the goy is bringing the chametz in, he's actually bringing it in to his own home, and therefore you're going to be plucked. So that's a huge chiddush. So let's look at Tosfos. Papa is like misvara, since you designated a place for him to keep it, even though you're responsible. It's as if you were makabel achrayis on the nachri's chametz, but the chametz is located in the nachri's house, and there would not be an issue. A huge chiddush, according to Tosfos. Zok the Gemara. Lememra the schiris kanya. You're claiming that since the goy has received from you a designated location for his chametz, it's as if he's renting that space from you. And since he's renting that space from you, the chametz is no longer in your rishus, the chametz is in the goy's rishus. But that's not true, because when a goy rents space from you, it's still considered your space. How do we know that? But now we look at the Mishnah. Af b'mokim she'amru lahaskir. There's a machlokes if you're allowed to rent properties at all to a goy in Eretz Yisrael. But even where you are allowed to rent him space, loy leveis dira amru, you're never allowed to rent him a home to live in. You're only allowed to rent him a warehouse or a business location, but you're not allowed to rent him a place where you can live. You know why? Because they bring avodah zarah, and you're not allowed to have avodah zarah in your house. Strike the Gemara. Bisoka daitach, this schir is kanya. If you want to say that you're allowed to have this chametz in the designated location for the guy in your area, because you say it's as if the guy rented that space, so that means you're claiming that now it's the guy's space. So if that's the case, the gabi avodah zarah as well. If I rent him a house, now that house is the guy's space. So then kika ma'ayel levesid and afshaka ma'ayel. When the guy's bringing in avodah zarah, he's not bringing it into your house. He's bringing it into his house. The Gemara shiny really schiris is not claiming, and that's why you're not allowed to rent a home, a dwelling to a guy because he'll bring avodah zarah. So why is there no isser abayi matzeh? It's not the guy's house; it's in your house. Shiny haka the afki rachmana beloshen lo yimatzeh. It's a special xeris akosov by chametz, since the Torah expressed it with the word lo yimatzeh. We dashin misham matzeh biyotcha. The isser is if it's matzeh biyotcha, you have access to it. Yotzeh she'ena matzeh biyotcha, even though technically it's your space that it's in, but it's space that you've designated for the goy, so you're no longer accessing it. And by the isser of chametz, it's totally not only in ownership, but it's totally in access. And therefore, since you don't have access to it, even though technically it is yours, you're not going to be mechuyev to be mevar the chametz. Period. A new sugya. This sometimes happens to people. Amar Rav Yehuda Marav. Rav Yehuda said the name of Rav. Hamoitzi chametz b'veisa b'yomtiv. You go into your mailbox on Chalamoid, on the first day Pesach, you open your mailbox, and you see a big, beautiful envelope from Beis Bracha. They sent you 10 pieces of chametz to use for your bedikas chametz. So now you have chametz cover in your house on Pesach. Now, of course, you made bittul. You said kol chamir v'chamir dikar b'shusay, you're mavatler. So you're not everybody, you're a balimotzi, but you still have a piece of chametz in here. What if you found a delicious cupcake, a delicious bagel in your house on Yom Tov? So the halach is it's muksa now, it's chametz. So koifa lavasakli, you should cover it over with a candy to prevent you from by mistake eating it. It can be very gishmaka piece of food, and to prevent you from eating it, you have to cover it over with a candy. Amar Rava says, im shall hekdeshu, if this piece of chametz that you found didn't belong to you, rather it belonged to hekdesh, then einay tzarech. Then in fact you do not have to. Then in fact you do not have to cover it over. Why not? You might eat it. My time, because mivdal b'dili minay. People are very careful to stay far away from hekdesh. So since it's hekdesh, we're not worried that somebody might eat it because no one's going to go near it. It's hekdesh. What if you have the chametz of a goy in your house in a case where it's legal, where you would not makal achrais? You should make a mechitza 10 tvachim because of hekdesh. If shall hekdeshu, and if it belongs to hekdesh, einay tzarech, my timer, because mivdal the dili in shiminei, because people will stay far away from it because it's hekdesh. The question is, why does the goy's chametz require a wall? Why can't you do the same thing that you would do with your own chametz and put a pot over it? So Rashi answers, we're talking about Erev Yom Tov. You know you have the goy's chametz in your house, put up a mechitza. Like we do in our homes. We put a sign on the room that the goy's chametz is located in, and we say, Nimkar l'nachu. Why do you have to do it? Mishum heker. You shouldn't forget and eat that chametz by mistake. Correct Rashi, why can't you just cover it over? So it's not enough. Being that this chametz is going to remain in your house all Yom Tov, to cover it over with a keli for a whole Yom Tov is not appropriate. Someone might need the pot and take it away, and then it's exposed chametz. So you have to make a barrier that's not going to be removed for all of Pesach. The case earlier when you found the chametz on Yom Tov, you can't build a wall on Yom Tov, so you don't have an option. A and B is all we need to cover this chametz for when you found it on Yom Tov is just until tonight, where you can go burn it. So for a temporary basis, and you don't have really a choice, you can't do anything else, you could cover it with a keli. But if you know you're going to be hosting the goy's chametz throughout Pesach, you need something more robust, like a full wall. What if you go away for Pesach, but you left early, you left before Purim, you already went away for Pesach. So now the chametz that's in your home is not even going to be accessible to you because you're not going to be there. So the halach is ein zakuk levayer. You don't have to burn the chametz. Toich shloshim yoyim. If it's within 30 days after Purim, then zakuk levayer. Then you are responsible to burn the chametz. What is the significance of 30 days? So let's see what Rashi says. Shloshim yom lePesach ulekamon mefarish. The Gemara is shortly going to explain. Kineged, what does the 30 days come from? Sheshayalin behilchas haPesach kodim haPesach shloshim yom. Because we start discussing hilchas Pesach 30 days before. So what does that have to do with chametz that you have to be a buyer? So if Rashi umeoz kol olav lihizar b'tzarech Pesach. Since we know that you start learning the halachas of Pesach 30 days before, that means we're already starting to usher in Pesach, and we have to start our preparations for Pesach. And that's why Rabbi Yehuda ben Rav said that the cutoff date of when you have to make the beer chametz is if you were in your home within 30 days of Pesach, all of the necessary preparation requirements were triggered. Amar Abai, Zokt Abai. This that we're saying, that if you left your home within 30 days of Pesach, the chiyuv of beer chametz was triggered, and you have to burn your chametz. Lo yamrin, we're only saying that elo shadaite lachse. If you're planning to come back on Pesach, and you're going to show up on Pesach, and there's going to be chametz there, you can have a real bal yirah bal yimatz. If you have no intention of coming back, then ein zakuk levayer. Even if you left within 30 days, you still don't need to make beer chametz because you're not going to be there for Pesach. Amalei Rava says that doesn't make sense what you're arguing. Because vidaite lachser, if you're planning to come back, so then afilu mirosh Hashanah nami, even if you left your home the day after Pesach, the year before, if you're going to be back in your home on Pesach, you better believe it that you got to clean the chametz out. So what you're saying doesn't make any sense. This that we say that if you leave your home before Purim, you don't have a mitzvah of beer chametz, you're not mechuyev to be mevayer the chametz in your house. That heter like amrin elisha in daiter lachser. That's only if you're not planning to come back on Pesach. Well, daiter lachser, afilu merish Hashanah, no matter how early you left, zakuk levayer, because you're going to show up in your house on Pesach and there'll be chametz there. So surely you have to be mevayer the chametz. So what would be the halacha? Here we're discussing that you're going to come back, and Rashi says, when are you coming back? Bimei Pesach. The Gemara doesn't say Bimei Pesach. Rashi's learning that it's only a problem if you're planning to arrive on Pesach. What about planning to arrive Erev Pesach, or 2 days before Pesach? So from Rashi's mashma, there's no problem, because you have plenty of time to do beer when you get back. You don't have to do beer before you leave. But I think the Meiri holds that even if you're planning to come back before Pesach, you're still mechuyev to make the beer before you go. And the reason is because plans get delayed, and travel gets delayed, and you might be planning to arrive before Pesach, but you might end up arriving late on Pesach, and then you're going to have the problem. Zok to Gemara weiter. The Rava l'tamei, and Rava is following his own svara that he says that if you're risking encountering the chametz when you come home, no matter when you leave, you have to make sure that this chametz is destroyed. What if before Purim you decided to make your house into a warehouse? So you might have chametz on the floor, but you pile up so much inventory on top of the little bits of chametz you might have on the floor, it's already like nofla olav mapoilas. It's as if it's inaccessible because a wall fell on it. And therefore, ein zakuk levayer, you do not have to make beer chametz even though you know there's chametz there underneath your inventory. But if you only decided to convert your house into a warehouse after Purim, then zakuk levayer, because the chametz that was there has already been triggered with a chiyuv beer. But the kodim shloshim nami, that I say, that if you made your house into a warehouse before Purim, you don't have to get rid of the chametz. That's if you have no intention of on Pesach clearing out the inventory and exposing the chametz. If your intention is to clear out that warehouse, then I feel no matter how early you made it into a warehouse, you have to make sure to get rid of the chametz because on Pesach you're going to end up exposing the chametz. Period. Frank the Gemara. Where do these 30 days that we're talking about that means you have to start preparing for Yom Tov, where does it come from, this 30 days? Dr. Makiditani, we get it from a brisa, where there's actually a machlekes about it. The Tanakama says, you start involving yourself in the Hilchos Pesach 30 days before. And that's what our whole sugya that we just learned was based on. But Reb Shimon Gamliel argues, and he says, Shtei Shabbosos, you don't have to start learning Hilchos Pesach a month before. It's enough to start learning Hilchos Pesach 2 weeks before. My time in the Tanakama. The Gemara wants to understand, where did the Tanakama get the 30-day rule from, and where did Reb Shimon ben Gamliel get the 2-week rule from? So Dr. Gemara, Shari Moshe, Amad the Pesach Rishon. Moshe was telling Klal Yisrael on Pesach, discussing Pesach on Pesach. And what was he talking about as part of his conversation? Umazir ala Pesach Sheni. And while he was talking to them on Pesach, he was already talking about the halachas of Pesach Sheni, which are 1 month off. So you see from here, from Moshe, that you start discussing a Yom Tov a month before the Yom Tov comes. Where do you see that?
Yeah, but the people that he had to speak to weren't there.
In the Chadami, but he did speak about it. It doesn't change the fact that he spoke about it. So I guess they would have to hear it over. They would have had to watch the replay on YouTube.
Yeah, exactly.
But he publicized halacha, and I guess once the halacha was publicized, those people, when they come back, would have found out. And it's possible actually that they were there. The derech people might not have been there, but the Tmeim might have been there, and they just couldn't participate in the Korban Pesach. This is the Yasam B'nai Yisrael Pesach b'Mayavai. So it was on Pesach, and what did it say occurred on Pesach? Yeah, in fact, that's what the Torah says. The story is that people were there and they were tamei, and they said, "What about us?" And Moshe said, "For you and for people who aren't here, because they're b'derech rechaita, we have a remedy. Next month, you can bring the Pesach Sheni." Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, who argues and says he only 2 weeks, holds you can't bring a raya from that Moshe was discussing the halachas of Pesach Sheni on Pesach. You know why? Amalach, I did the Ayr of the middle of the Pesach, since he was talking in between Nechem Ayr and Shul, the Rav gives a drasha and shares with us halachas of Yom Tov. He was talking about Hilchos Pesach, Masik Lehu l'chol middle of the Pesach, so he elaborated on everything. But you don't necessarily know that without any prompting on your own, you have to start learning halachas 30 days before. Maybe Moshe just mentioned it because he was talking about Pesach. So therefore, Reb Shimon Gamliel writes off and ignores, dismisses the raya that the Chachamim brings. My time is Reb Shimon Gamliel. Where did Reb Shimon Gamliel get this 2-week preparation period? So he has a different pasuk. We have a pasuk that shows Moshe standing on Rosh Chodesh. Umazir ala Pesach. He's standing on Rosh Chodesh Nisan, and he starts talking about Pesach. So that's 2 weeks before. Shenamar, where did you see he did this? It says Achodesh Hazel Lechem Reish Chadashim, and then a couple of psukim later it says Dabru El Kol Adas Yisrael Leimor Be'eser LaChodesh Hazeh Ve'yichul Lechem Ish Tzelav Beisach. He started already telling him about the Korban Pesach, and this was 2 weeks before. So let's pause for a second. David Dolty asked a very good question. David Dolty says that when did he tell them to grab the animal and tie it to the bed? On the 10th day. So in fact, this is really only 10 days in advance, not 2 weeks. But what we thought the answer is the mitzvah is to start talking about the Yom Tov 30 days before the Yom Tov starts. Yeah, there might be some preparations that you have to start in advance of Pesach, but that doesn't change the fact that the date to start discussing the halachas are 30 days before Pesach actually starts, and not 30 days, or in this case, 2 weeks before Pesach starts, and not 2 weeks before the preparation starts. Now, the other kasha here, Tosfos asks that Toshus asks that, I'm sorry, Toshus Kasha is on a little bit later. So let's see the next Gemara's Kasha. Mimai, the Beresh Yarchakoi. When it says Dabur el Koladas Yisrael Leinar, who said that was on the same day as a Chodesh as Elachem? Who said that was Rosh Chodesh? Dilma ba'arbo b'yarcha or b'chamisha b'yarcha. Maybe the day that Moshe Rabbeinu gave the Eden the instructions for Pesach, maybe that was the second, or third, or fourth day, or fifth day of the month. How do you know it's Rosh Chodesh? Frek Toshus, we have rayas from other Masechtas, in fact, that this story of Dabru el Koladas Yisrael occurred on Rosh Chodesh. So what's the Gemara's Kasha here? Zok Toshus, what does the word say? Dabru el Koladas Yisrael. This is not Moshe talking. This is Hashem commanding Moshe to give this information over to Klal Yisrael. But we don't know when Moshe actually did it. Maybe Moshe actually delivered the message a day later, 2 days later. We only know at best that Hashem told Moshe about it on Rosh Chodesh. But we have no proof of exactly which day Moshe actually gave over this information to Klal Yisrael. So Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, if you're looking for a makar of 2 weeks before, we don't have it from here. We can learn it from a different pasuk. It says, so the second year, the first month, which is Rosh Chodesh Nisan, and then it says he's talking about the Korban Pesach. In fact, tomorrow I have the same question here as I had before. Who said that this pasuk, who said it's on the first day of the month? It was in the first month. How do you know it was the first day of the first month? So, the Gemara, because also midbar mi midbar. This pasuk says Vayomer Hashem al Moshe b'midbar Sinai, and we have another pasuk that talks about the midbar. So Hashem Vayidaber Hashem al Moshe b'midbar Sinai ba'oil moed be'echad lachodesh hasheni. We have another pasuk that's talking about Moshe, Hashem talking to Moshe in the midbar, and in that pasuk it's talking about Rosh Chodesh. So we make like a hekesh. Mala halon b'Rosh Chodesh, just like in this pasuk that uses the word b'midbar, the conversation occurred on Rosh Chodesh. Afkan, so too, the earlier pasuk by the Abisham Moshe b'midbar Sinai is talking about Rosh Chodesh. Afkan b'Rosh Chodesh. So period. Now we have a makar to Rav Shimon ben Gamliel that Moshe Rabbeinu instructed the Eden about the Yom Tov of Pesach on Rosh Chodesh, which was 2 weeks before. But we just brought in 2 psukim. The 2 psukim with Bamidbar that we had a hekesh from. So let's take a closer look at these psukim. So I'm going to slide over to the Torah Or HaSholim, and we're going to look at these 2 psukim. So it says as follows: Vayidaber Hashem al Moshe b'midbar Sinai b'shana hashenis l'tzeisam me'eretz Mitzrayim b'chodesh harishon leimer. So when was this? This was Rosh Chodesh Nisan, right? We determined this Rosh Chodesh Nisan. Where is this mentioned in the Torah? In Bamidbar Perek Tes. You see that? It's Bamidbar Perek Tes. Where do we have the other pasuk quoted? Vayidaber Hashem al Moshe b'midbar Sinai b'oil moed be'echad l'chodesh hasheni. So this was Rosh Chodesh Iyar, right? We're bringing a raya from Rosh Chodesh Iyar to Rosh Chodesh Nisan. Where is this pasuk that's talking about Rosh Chodesh Iyar? Bamidbar Aleph. So it's funny. The Torah, when it's talking about Rosh Chodesh Iyar, is earlier in the Torah from when the Torah is discussing Rosh Chodesh Nisan. It's out of order. So that's the Gemara's kasha here. Frag the Gemara, v'nichtav b'reisha the Chodesh Rishon, v'hadu nichtav the Chodesh Sheni. Shouldn't the Torah relate these events in chronological order? Amar B'nashe bar Tachlis v'mishmei Rav, Yosy Meres. You see from here, ein muktam u'me'ucher b'Torah. You cannot bring a raya to the chronological events from the Torah, because the Torah is not written in order of how it happened. The Torah has its order based on whatever the Torah's reasons for the order is, but it's not necessarily in order of what happened. I remember when I was a young child, on Simchas Torah night, the Gabba was giving out the Sefer Torah, and there was someone who felt he should have gotten an earlier hakafa, and he got a later hakafa, and he expressed that he was upset. So the Gabba told him, "Don't worry. It says in the Gemara, "Ein muktam u'me'ucher b'Torah." When it comes to getting a Torah, It doesn't matter if you get it earlier or later, it's all the same. Amar Rapapa said, Loy Amron Ela B'Trein Yom. This that we say in Muktam Mukham B'Torah, if we're talking about two different subject matters, they're not linked to each other. Aval B'Chad and Yona, but if you're talking about one subject matter, my demuktam muktam, my demucher mucher, then in fact it would be relevant to order, and I'll prove it to you. The loyte mahachi, if you're not going to agree that in one halacha, in one subject, you do say it's in order, then how could you ever darshan a klal uprat? Klal uprat, the order is very important because there's a huge difference in how you darshan the klal coming first and the prat coming afterwards than if it's swapped around. So heichi klal uprat halacha is ein b'klal elamasha b'prat. We say that the prat limits the klal and it's limited to only the prat. Well, how do you know that the klal is first and the prat is second? If you hold a muktam melucher, dilma prat uklalu. Maybe the klal is later if you can't go by the order. Elamai, it must be that since we're talking about one specific halacha, there it has to be in order. The su prat klal on the other way around. Prat klal nasa klal moisav ala prat. Again, the same question. Dilma klal prat. So you have to say that there is some order. Fact Gemara, ihachi afilu b'trein yanim nami. If so, that there's an issue of klal prat, then it shouldn't only be in one inyan, it should even be in multiple inyanim. And why is that? Zok Rashi ihachi kachalach afilu b'trein yanim tikshilach. You know why? The hadainin klal prat. You also use the klal prat method of analyzing psukim. Kishenemar echad men de parshazu. Even if things are in different parshas, you do say klal prat. You can say there's a klal on this parsha and a prat of the next parsha. So you have to say even in two different inyonim, you say klal uprat. Zok the Gemara. Hani chalaman da omar klal uprat hamiru chakim zebazeh ein dadilai say klal uprat shaper. Your distinction between one inyan and two inyonim would make sense if you hold that you could never darshan a klal uprat if the klal is in one parsha and the prat in a different parsha. If you hold you cannot don klal prat, then we're good because they're out of order. They're not necessarily in the right order. Elaman the Amar Donin, there is a shita who holds that you will darshan klal prat even if the klal and the prat are in two different parshas, far away from each other. Michael Amemer, how could you possibly darshan that way if we don't even know what the right order is? The halacha is, when do you say that you done a klal prat if they're far away from each other? That's only if they're talking about the same subject matter. But if they're talking about two different subject matters, then everybody agrees. In fact, you would not be able to don klal prat because in fact it might not be in the right order. You know what? It's 9:55. This is where I got up to. I didn't even get up to here. I got up to a little bit above here in the morning. So I'm going to have to start from here anyway, Motzei Shabbos. So let's stop here and we'll pick up here Motzei Shabbos. So we'll learn Motzei Shabbos at 7 o'clock, and it's on channel C, which is 5780. We're also learning in Shul between Mincha Ma'ariv, even though we don't know if it's allowed, but it's much easier to apologize for having made an oops than it is to pre-approve something. So we are going to attempt to learn between Mincha.
How's davening working on Shabbos? Like, what do
there's enough
people come and they direct you to a room?
Turn off the YouTube. Turn off the.
That's a good idea.